everybody, this is Mrs. Howell. We're going to finish up Module 14 today, 14B. This is the respiratory system. You're going to look for the red words on the slides to fill in your guided notes. So let's get started. We only have a little bit of material to cover this week, and then there's a section at the end of this chapter in your book that you probably covered in your biology course last year or the year before. I'm going to skip that here just for the sake of time. If we do have any time in class, I can review it a little bit, but it's not something I'm going to test you over on this coming test because I think you covered that last year. So last week, we really focused on the anatomy and physiology of the respiratory system, the different parts of the lungs and the tissues and all the things that those parts do for you in your respiratory system. So to review, what did we say were the four main functions of the respiratory system? Well, it was olfaction, which is just the sense of smell, your voice, ventilation, and respiration. So now today we're going to talk about how we move gases in and out, both in and out of our body and in and out of our cells. So we're going to look at the way the respiratory system works to move these gases in and out of our body first. So oxygen, which comes from our atmosphere, from the air we breathe, is necessary for each one of your cells because they have to use oxygen to create ATP, which is the energy molecule for your body to be able to do any work. So how does the body take in oxygen from the air? Have you ever thought of that? And the carbon dioxide that our body builds up as a waste product, how do we dump that back into the atmosphere when we exhale? So why does oxygen come in and carbon dioxide go out? How do the gases know what to do and which direction to go? Well, the answer is really very simple. It's basic diffusion. You probably remember that we discussed diffusion once before. In simple diffusion, substances always move from areas of high concentration toward areas of low concentration. So I want you to take a look at what happens in this glass. I hope this is something you can see on the screen as you watch. But I want to take a look at what happens when I put a drop of food coloring in the glass. So the food coloring is very concentrated when it first drops into the water. So the food coloring molecules move from the highly concentrated drop out into the rest of the water where the food coloring was a very low concentration. It wasn't even there. So really quickly that droplet spreads out throughout the entire glass. I don't have to stir. I don't have to heat the glass of water. I don't have to apply any energy at all. It moves on its own. Well, that's just basic simple diffusion. And that's with liquids, but gases that occupy any space work the same way. They will move from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. If you think about the alveoli that we learned about last week, those are the terminal sacs within the lung tissue that are going to come in direct contact with your capillary network, which carries the blood. The connection between the blood and the gas in the alveoli is where external respiration takes place. Even though you think of it as it's inside your body, it's external respiration because it's taken the air from outside externally and bringing it into your body for the first time. Now your textbook goes into this really in-depth discussion about partial pressures of gases, and it explains Dalton's law of partial pressure. Most of you, I don't think any of you in this class this semester took chemistry, so Dalton's law is foreign to you. You're not familiar with it. Well, basically, just what it boils down to is that the overall pressure exerted by any mixture of gases is equal to the sum of the partial pressure of each individual gas. So it's a simple arithmetic. A plus B plus C plus D equals E. So think of it this way. A, B, C, and D. Those are the gases in the water vapor that are always in the air that we breathe. At normal atmospheric pressure, the amount of pressure for the total air we breathe, that would be E, the sum, is about 760 millimeters of mercury. We can measure that. Well, the pressure or the percentages of the gases that make up the air we breathe, 74% nitrogen, 20% of the air we breathe is oxygen, 6% is water vapor, and only 4/100ths of the air that we breathe in is carbon dioxide. So I guess you realize we do breathe in carbon dioxide as well as breathing it out. Well, you could calculate the individual partial pressures for each and every one of these atmospheric gases, and you do that by multiplying the percentage by the overall pressure. For instance, the partial pressure of oxygen we said was 20% times the 760 millimeters of mercury. So the percentages of oxygen was 20. The pressure overall is 760. Multiply those numbers together and you get 152 millimeters of mercury. So now what I want you to do is show your work on your guided notes, put the video on pause, and do the math for all of these. So go back and look at the previous slide if you'd like to, or look on your notes and get the percentage for nitrogen, water vapor, and carbon dioxide, multiply by the total, which is 760, and get the percent or the number of millimeters of mercury, which is the partial pressure for each of these gases. So what you get shows you the amount of each gas present in our air. What is the partial pressure of nitrogen? What is the partial pressure of oxygen? And so forth. So it's really easy to see when you get that list written in front of you that there's a lot more oxygen in the air that we breathe than there is carbon dioxide. Well, now you can do the same thing with the gases of your blood, but I'm not going to make you do the math this time. I'll just give you the answers. So here are the figures for the gases that we care about. Oxygen is 40 to 44 millimeters of mercury. So you could write on your notes, change that 44 to a 40. I think that's probably more accurate to what we're going to talk about. And carbon dioxide is 45 millimeters of mercury. That's the amount of gas that we have circulating in our blood. So when you compare now the difference between what's in the air we breathe and what's circulating throughout our system, throughout our blood, oxygen in the air, which is equal to the oxygen in our alveoli, because we breathe that in, is a lot higher than the amount of oxygen in the blood. And the carbon dioxide of the blood is a lot higher than that tiny amount that's out in the air that we breathe. So who cares? What does all that mean? Well, diffusion, just like the glass of water. Diffusion, gases are going to move across the membranes of the alveoli and the capillary network from their area of high concentration toward area of low concentration. This transfer of gases just continues to happen until an equilibrium is reached, and it happens really quickly. The lungs capillaries quickly move the oxygen-rich blood then through the venules and the pulmonary veins, and they dump that bright red oxygenated blood into the left side of your heart so that your heart can then pump and transport this through the aorta and out into the rest of your body, into the tissues. As the blood is being moved through the pulmonary veins to get into the heart, it did pick up a little bit of deoxygenated blood along the way. So at that time, in that point, the blood that gets into the left side of the heart, that's going to be transported out to the tissues, the partial pressure at that point of oxygen is about 95%. And carbon dioxide is about 40%. Now that's the end of external respiration. So external, remember, is taking the external air, the atmospheric air that we have surrounding us, and bringing that into our lungs. Now we're going to talk about the internal respiration, and that's internally at the cellular level or at the tissues. It takes place as the gases are exchanged at the level of the tissues. So it's diffusion here as well. The same thing, movement from high concentration to low concentration. So cells have a high level of carbon dioxide buildup, and as a result, and that's because they've consumed and used up all the oxygen. So here's a cell, and this is the capillary that's coming past the cell. And because we've got a high level of carbon dioxide, the carbon dioxide is going to move from high to low. When the capillaries meet these membranes, oxygen that's in the blood is going to diffuse out of the bloodstream and into the tissues from high concentration into where it was low. And carbon dioxide, as I said, is going to do the same thing in the reverse direction. Here's the diagram from your textbook. So let me talk you through that one really quick. All right, so the web in this diagram that's kind of behind my head in this picture here, this web, that is the diagram of the tissues throughout your whole body. Oxygen in that area is low in your tissues because you've used up oxygen in your cells. 44 millimeters of mercury or 40 millimeters of mercury. Carbon dioxide is relatively high because you have a lot of carbon dioxide waste produced. So the blood is blue. Remember, we talked about the fact that your blood's not really blue. We just draw it that way in all of our textbooks. So deoxygenated blood then moves from your tissues into the right side of your heart. And then from the right side of your heart, it gets pumped into your lungs. So that's this blue gets pumped into the lungs. This is here. So the lungs are where the gas exchange increases the amount of oxygen. So you're breathing in oxygen, so it goes from out here in the atmosphere, where high percentage of oxygen moves into your tissues or into your bloodstream. So it increases oxygen to 104 and lowers the carbon dioxide as you breathe out. So a little bit of this deoxygenated blood from your lungs gets mixed into the system. So overall, when the blood gets into the left side of your heart, and remember this picture of a heart is a person lying down facing you. All right, so the left side of their heart is 95 millimeters of mercury. And if you look, the numbers are here in your book, highlighted in mine. And this is the blood that is then pumped out into the body, where the exchange of the tissues takes place, and then this entire circulation starts over again. And we'll look at that in class. So remember last week we talked about the diaphragm. Remember that muscle that's below your ribs that contracts and helps you to breathe in and out. The movement of these muscles causes air to rush into and out of your lungs. Luckily, you don't have any conscious control of that at all. If you did, if you had to think about it, you'd never be able to sleep. Control of your breathing takes place in the medulla and the pons of your brain stem, the lowest level of your brain. You might need to look back at your notes from Module 8 if you've forgotten about those. So in the medulla, there are two groups of neurons. You've got the dorsal respiratory group in the back and the ventral respiratory group in the front. You've also got the pons, where there is one group called the pontine respiratory group. Rhythmic breathing is controlled by the dorsal respiratory group. It controls your diaphragm. The dorsal controls your diaphragm, and that gives you the rhythmic in and out of your breathing. But the more active you get, the more you have to breathe. You breathe more. So the dorsal group then stimulates the ventral group, which is in the front of your medulla, and that's what keeps your abdominals and intercostal muscles working to help increase the volume of the air in your lungs. Now, the pontine group, scientists don't quite understand yet. All that we gather at this point is that there's somehow this aids the switch between the in and the out of breathing. It takes 2 seconds roughly for you to breathe in and 3 seconds for most people to breathe out. You also have this thing called the Herring-Brewer reflex. This is a fail-safe mechanism that prevents you from overstretching your lungs. When you take a very deep breath, something triggers a stretch receptor in the bronchiole that immediately sends action potentials on a neuron to the dorsal and the ventral groups of the medulla. This tells them to stop the deep breath, and it automatically forces you to breathe out. In addition to mechanically controlling your breathing with muscles, you also were created with a chemical control center. The amount of carbon dioxide and your pH of your blood controls this switch. The switch controls how deep and how quickly you breathe. So let me cut to the chase. The more carbon dioxide in your blood, the lower your pH. So let's say you're running a race and you've used up all your oxygen in your cells and you've made a whole lot of extra carbon dioxide waste. So you have a high level of carbon dioxide. You begin to breathe deeper. It's the need to get rid of this excess carbon dioxide that makes you breathe deep. As your carbon dioxide then goes lower, because you're breathing heavy, your pH then comes back to normal. The opposite is true as well. So if your pH is too low, that means your carbon dioxide is too high, and that makes your body breathe faster. It increases ventilation so you can remove carbon dioxide, and then that raises your pH. But then if your pH ever gets too high, that means your carbon dioxide is too low. It means your body's going to decrease ventilation so you can hang on to some of that carbon dioxide, and that will lower the pH in your blood. All this is controlled in the medulla by chemoreceptors instead of those mechanical receptors. The previous mentioned mechanical neurons were for the basic rhythm of breathing. These chemoreceptors are for the rate and the depth. So just this basic rhythm of in and out is under mechanical control, but chemical control is how fast and how deep your breathing takes place. And that's it. And I just realized when I was making this that we only have 2 more modules to go. So we'll see you on Monday.